I'm going to introduce Mike Andriana. He's our principal person that I deal with Pullman and Comley on bond issues, and I've been dealing with Mike the 7 years that I've been here. And I've dealt with Pullman and other venues that I've worked. In fact, I go far enough back that I dealt with Ray and Pullman Comley, right? When he was doing bond counsel work many years ago. So that goes to show my age at that point. You might want to, yeah. So you want to introduce your participants,
Sure,
Mike?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. As John said, I'm Mike Andriana and act as the city's primary bond counsel contact. Just to give you a very quick introduction, as you all know, the city has a rather large referendum question before it come November, and as part of that referendum question, we have worked with the city in preparing an explanatory text. And if you're not 100% sure what that is, you'll learn more about those tonight. But also, as part of that, questions have come up as once you have a pending referendum, what can and can't the city and various city officials do? And I suggested to John and Josh that it probably made a lot of sense for us to host just a short webinar for you all as to kind of explaining some of the rules that are come into play once you have a pending referendum question. So what I did was brought in our two leading authorities for this. One is Mark Samaruga, who's a partner in our school law department and deals with referendum questions, particularly for regional school districts, but also when questions come up for some of our municipal clients. And then also with us today is Glenn Rabacki, who's a partner in our public finance department. And Glenn does bond counsel work like I do for other municipalities, but Glenn is also our kind of expert when it comes to explanatory text. So what we've done is prepared a PowerPoint presentation, and Mark and Glenn are going to bring you through that. We have a lot to discuss, but please, if any of you have questions, raise your hand or click that little button where it shows the raise hand, whatever, and we're happy to have discussion about various questions that might come up, because this is an interesting area that does raise a number of questions. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Mark Samaruga. I will let this group know that I have to bow out at about 5:25. I have a board meeting at 5:30, but you'll be in good hands of Mark and Glenn. So at this point, Mark, why don't you take it away? Are you on mute, Mark?
Yeah, he's muted. There he goes.
It's a rule I must do that at least once a day or once for every presentation I do. You think after 2.5 years I'd learn no better. But good afternoon again. Thank you, Mike. We're going to do a few PowerPoint slides here on the issues of referendum advocacy. We want to keep this as interactive as possible. I don't think especially at this time of day, you want to hear a lecture from us. So we're going to hopefully educate, and also we want to both educate you and scare you just a little bit, but not too much. So I'm going to go to the first slide and turn it over to Glenn. Here we go.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Frankly, first looking at, I guess, with regards to advocacy and what you can and can't do when a referendum is pending. We usually, as always, turn to the law first. And where the rule is found is in section 9369B of the general statutes. We've kind of condensed it down here where it briefly says that except as specifically authorized section, no expenditure of state or municipal funds, and that's a very important point, the expenditure of state or municipal funds shall be made to influence any person to vote for approval or disapproval of any such proposal or question approved for submission to the electors at a referendum, or to otherwise influence or aid the success or defeat of any such referendum. That's the if you want, the rule we're living with. And one of the things that we can pull from that is the fact that the State Elections and Enforcement Commission, and that's who enforces this particular provision, this is where they pull their three-part test and how they're going to analyze any complaint or any matter that comes up. And what we pull from this is, does the piece advocate a position? It can be for or against. Is there an expenditure of public funds in which the advocacy was advanced? And is there a referendum pending? Now I'll go back, I'll turn over.
Okay, here we go.
What usually comes up is, what tools are available to you for construing this law? And frankly, again, it's all stems from the State Elections Enforcement Commission. First, they've issued a number of advisory opinions. These are where they've normally addressed the prohibition of public funds relating to advocacy. These opinions, they're usually, they put them out there to provide general guidance, and they usually address specific situations. What's important with regards to advisory opinions is that advisory opinions, particularly Sweetman, has been, as we've put it, has the tacit approval of the Connecticut Supreme Court. What happened is that the SEEC came across with a decision that was adverse to a school district and their superintendent, and what was there, they brought it to court. It was appealed, and the Supreme Court essentially backed the committee's findings and the analysis that they took. And then, as another tool for construing this law, a second is the fact that the SEEC issues decisions. All of these are published on their website, so they are out there and are available for looking through, preferably before you proceed with the explanatory text and such. Looking at what's prohibited, I think Mark.
Yes, the biggest mistake, one of the common mistakes I still see people do, because there's times people send things to me in advance to look at. Actually, I'm kind of prefer when they send it to me in advance to look at it as opposed to after it's done, because I really can't do anything at that point in time, is just because you don't use the magic words vote yes, that doesn't mean that you're okay. Just because you don't tell someone explicitly, hey, you got to vote for this, doesn't mean that you are in compliance with the law. I mean, what you look at here is, and this is from the Sweetman case, which was involved Region 17 about 20 years or so, and also SEC guidance, is you look at generally the whole thing, whole in part, whether the whole, the communication in whole or part would urge a listener or reader to vote in a particular manner. And you look at the style, tenor, and timing of a communication. Look at the whole picture. So you can, basically, without saying yes, you can be telling people to vote yes, and the SEC will find that to be in violation of the statute.
Yeah, I think what Mark is saying is, and I think a great point, is that the writing is taken as a whole, and it's, what is it saying? What is the tenor of it? What is the style? You can tell when somebody's pushing a result. And like Mark said, you don't have to say, please vote yes, please vote no. and we kind of looked into it a little bit deeper, and I think we've got on our slide that probably a very important kind of rule of thumb is not to rely on opinions as opposed to facts. And a lot of times what happens is and a good example of opinions is when the explanatory text lays out the options that are being considered or were considered before going to referendum. And, factually, you can say, if you want to say one option would be very plain, very even keel. However, when opinions creep in, you might say, well, the best option is, again, you're not saying vote yes, but you've just indicated what you clearly think is, what they should vote for.
Okay,
Yeah,
I have
one
here.
quick question.
Sorry.
Just
Mhm.
when you talk about the three elements, that could get you in trouble with the SEC, do all three have to be satisfied?
Yes.
Okay,
In
you.
that instance, for there to be something, for it to be determined to be violative of the statute, and I'm going to repeat it just because it is very important. Does it advocate a yes or a no or an outcome that the draftsman wanted? And this is very key. Is there an expenditure of public funds? That's very important. And then also too is a referendum has to be pending at the time. Before the referendum is pending, the law, this particular provision does not come into play.
I'm not going to go through the actual flyer in the Sweetman case. This was a budget case from about over 20 years ago. This is the Supreme Court speaking on this, and I'm sorry I can't capture it all on a PowerPoint. Usually when I do these presentations, I actually give people the handout so they can see what it looked like. But here you can see, first of all, they have a title. This is about a budget, an education budget of significance, making a difference for our children. And they have, look at that, they have balloons in the background, and they have, a kid. It's almost like they're saying, I believe the children are our future. You almost hear Whitney Houston singing in the background. You have, or Dr. Seuss, it's just the way, and it goes, all the places they'll go and the tools they need. Okay, so it's already starting to set a mood here. And then you go, and I apologize because the font is way too small. This probably failed PowerPoint 101, but I wanted to get this all to you. This is what was in here. First of all, the very first bullet point, hey, we worked many hours developing this proposal. Our great superintendent of schools, he pared down the principal's request and shaped them. And we start to get the thick stuff laying on thick, incorporating his views of educational priorities and plans for the coming future. And then the committee, kept in mind that education is our business and our products are the future generations of citizenry. And then they try to go with the sympathy approach. Hey, we understand we need to control spending. We understand the many concerns. We're taking steps to show accountability, but we also understand we must provide a solid educational program and safe environment. This is not too subtle. I'll put it that way. And, we're trying to strengthen, the district's strength. We're trying to show them, we need to set aside monies. We got to maintain our facilities, all this. And then the favorite one is the last bullet point here about, because it's kind of apropos with inflation, where it has think a minute about your own budgets. Have you or your friends had an increase in income to keep pace with the rate of inflation? If not, how did you cope? Okay, they go, and how did you cut or adjust? So it's apropos they mentioned this now when we're back having inflation again. Just the idea that they're trying to build sympathy here. Basically we have to increase the budget because of inflation and keeping up with things. And it even adds with, if we eliminate what some consider to be frills, we have no longer provide the varieties of education and discipline the district communities have come to expect for its children. I'll just say this, I've reviewed explanatory text for regional districts. Wow, I'll just say that after reading this in terms of how it didn't just go over the line, it crossed and marched over the line. There's more, and this is a good example. Here, if you set out numbers, just saying, for example, the budget has an 8% increase, that's fine. I think that's factual. But to say an increase, it may seem steep, but let us remember, see, you're starting to get little opinions here. And it talks about how things are locked in, basically saying, we can't increase this. And it says only really part of it's really an actual increase, which is to finance our improved educational program. And then it adds here about, our mission to equip all students with knowledge, competencies, orientation, so they become, basically they'll become great citizens and lifelong learning. All this, the Supreme Court said, look, point blank, was intended to convince parents and members of the negative consequences that would follow if the budget were voted down. This is basically saying, hey, this is the bare bone, least we could do. We had to do this budget. We had no choice. If you vote against it, the world will come to an end, so to speak. And there was more, because the next page, they had the pictures of the Board of Education members, and it had in big block capital letters, dedicated to quality education in Haddam and Killingworth. And it just, it talks about the budget will enable our district to maintain educationally sound class sizes and our strong academic environment, academic programs, and enhance our activities. Basically, this text, it's advocacy. Not saying yes, but it's saying basically, this budget's great, you got to vote for it. And they said point blank, the obvious here, that, the structure conveyed the message. The board, the budget is necessary to make a difference for our children, considering the places they'll go and the tools they need. Now, they point out here that an oral argument, at least when they were before the Supreme Court, they did concede, it did express, the sentiment, we worked hard on this budget. We've been working on it for several months. Here it is. We hope it gets your support. They already conceded that. So they basically said we're going to lose. And, we agreed this would make the ordinary person think, we got, the particular result is urged and we got to vote for this. And again, this was the most somewhat egregious, but it's a good example of how adjectives are being overused and how not only subliminal messages, but overt messages.
Hey, Mark, this is Mike. Just a quick question, and I assume this was the case in the Sweetman decision. The other two kind of prongs to the test, there obviously was a referendum pending.
Yep.
And two, although we don't talk about it here, there must have been some use of public funds to produce this flyer. And
yep, it was sent out and sent home with people. We're going to discuss what funds are, but it was no one disputed. It was public funds were used. They viewed it as just telling people to vote. Right. At first said, all we're doing is telling people to vote and giving them facts, but they went far. So there were public funds used, and I think they were sent home what all the kids do, or maybe on a flyer too that was mailed to people. So it was clearly they passed over that threshold. Okay, the next one is Glenn's.
Yep, and just to kind of show that it's not just printed materials or flyers that you send out. We put into the slides the Nicholas matter, and what Nicholas had to do with back in 2012 was robocalls. A lot of towns have emergency systems, whatnot, that or even just for community information that they will put things out. And in the Nicholas matter, the telephone calls that went out or the robocalls that went out didn't a position or not. It basically what it did was it told people or told citizens that they can go to the website for more information. And now we get into with websites and what's on there. And in this instance, they had narrated slide presentations. They had the proposal, they had answers to questions. They had a whole bunch of things on there that covered not just the project itself, but also, particularly their position on it. And the SEC in that case believed that the narrated slide presentation reflected that spending money to build a new high school was the best option for community. We're back into, I think, what Mark emphasized with the Sweetman case, but again, opinion versus fact. And there it's saying it's the best option. The SEC went on to further note with regards that, and this brings in kind of what the standard is. It was information that a reasonable person would view as advocating for a positive vote on the referendum. They picked through the different matters that the robocall turned the recipients to look on the website and such. And they basically came to the same conclusion like they came in Sweetman. Again, the materials, while they were not a go out and vote yes, they certainly projected a position that was certainly, the right answer would be to vote yes. We also added on the bottom of this particular slide that there was Public Act 13247 in 2013, message advocacy, and as these robocall alerts kind of became bigger, this sort of one now would be illegal at this point. What the Public Act did was it added language with regards to the use of community notification systems. And it also kind of broadens it, if you will. Notification systems include email, text, telephone, or other electronic or automated means. So it really kind of covers the whole spectrum of things. And what it does is it says that you can use what's a community notification system, but it limits what you can actually say on it. And it actually spells it right out in the statute. You're limited to, you can say the time and the location of a referendum. You can have a statement of the question as it appears on the ballot. So, tell people what they'd be voting for. And then it can have explanatory text or other materials, but it's as those items are authorized by 9369B. And again, the thrust is no advocacy in that.
Let me add this. I have to say this for purposes of full disclosure. The attorney for the school district in the Nicholas case was yours truly. And it was tough to explain to the client how this was really a no-brainer once you had the link to the website, because the website, again, was putting, it was difficult to try to argue otherwise. So another common mistake, and I've heard this all the time, is that especially when a PTO group wants to send home flyers saying to vote yes, they'll say, well, they use the school copier, but if we reimburse the school for the paper, or the flyer, we didn't violate the law. And that's wrong, because basically any use of school equipment, regardless of what you do, because it's a use of funds. So if you use school facilities, supplies, equipment, postage, even if you reimburse it, again, or you use school equipment to prepare the materials, that might even be typing it up, whatever. That's illegal advocacy under the law 9-369B. And it says point blank, this goes to the question of you may hear about the PTOs not using school equipment to prepare or copy these materials. Again, even if they're reimbursed. And it also even applies to the school public address system. So you can't, there's a value to the public address system, just as there's a value to the website. You could claim, well, there's no additional money being spent. The idea is that is money being spent. Now, it also includes equipment. You can't, in terms of the district website, again, you saw Glenn refer to that Nicholas case, and you saw on the website what was up there. You can't use that. Even again, you could argue, well, we already paid for it. There's no additional cost. The idea is you're still using equipment. Now, an outside group, this is interesting, an outside group on its own, like friends of the high school, could, and we can discuss or form a PAC and set up their own website and spend their own money and use their own equipment to do so. And that's fine. Now, the problem is you still can't have up on the district website materials that are suddenly linked in. So.
Yeah, and if I could jump in, Mark, really quick on that. We have a lot of times where we see with towns where when they're in all the, the preparation of a project before they actually go and act on it, and the town will put a lot of things on its website, and a lot of times the like Public Works will put something up there, or in some cases the building committee, or some cases, one of the other departments of a town will put up items that, in the process leading up to before a referendum is determined, they'll have all that up there, and it's fine. Once the referendum has been put into place, they start saying, oh, you can find more information on a Public Works site or something. And even though it had been up there, now all of a sudden, I think it takes on a different color once you're in that referendum mode.
Yeah, I had an interesting discussion with the SEEC people during that Nicholas case. Arguably these were all public records, and for example, in the minutes of a meeting, if these are discussed, you can't suddenly pull them down. They're currently fine being there, but it's one thing if they have to be there, if they're in minutes or part of documents from a meeting, that's one thing. But if you're actually promoting, saying, "Hey, go look at them," that's a different kettle of fish.
Mark Betancourt has his hand up.
Okay.
Do you want me? How do you want to
Yeah.
play this? Do you want me to let you know when somebody has their hand up?
I
I don't
think
know
it's
if you
probably
can
a
see
good
the
idea.
participations.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Hey, just, I mean, obviously, these are, little older cases. So what about now in the age of social media, where everybody's got, their own sites or whatever? I actually have a couple of sites in like YouTube and stuff like that. So is it possible to make things and post them? I mean, I do stuff at no cost for crying out loud. So.
Well, your own personal social media as opposed to the official social media page of some, for example.
Correct.
I mean, you could draw a line. I mean, I'm not sure the case has ever been resolved yet, but
yeah, I know why. I'm not interested in being a test case either.
I mean,
but,
for example, I'm making an argument.
Okay, Mike.
I've had these questions asked to me, like a superintendent of schools, who on their own, again, there's an official Facebook posting or LinkedIn for the school district or Twitter account, but on his own, he tweets stuff and everything. And you could argue, that, hey, he's exercising his First Amendment rights. And I would argue that he can do so. And you can see if he can have a bona fide news conference, if he can speak to the press, you can write letters to the editor on your own time. I'd argue if your own personal Facebook post is similar to that. Now, the question is, does it somehow come off as being clear? These are not the official opinion. This is him speaking on his own, is not somehow any involvement from the town or the school district. That's always the difficult part, because as we're going to discuss, I
will say that most social media policies at the corporate level require you to have a disclaimer when you post regarding that, materials regarding the work site, so that these are my opinions and I don't represent, I work at Pfizer, for instance, so I'll just use that, but and their corporate policy runs along that line. So, you literally have to put a disclaimer in there that, that's, your personal opinion and not theirs. And of course they'll come after you anyway, but that's besides the point.
I mean, I've had this discussion with them where I say, look, if you can, again, write a letter to editor, why can't you tweet on it? But again, the question is it your personal Twitter versus the Twitter account of the superintendent or the town manager, whatever it may be? Now, we mentioned facilities, and this is a key thing, is even-handedness, because, for example, if the PTO or some group, let's assume the group, Save the High School or whatever, formed a group and they wanted to have access to the facilities, and you have a facility access policy, as long as you're enforcing that you're usually using that facility access policy and you're forcing it even-handedly, you can do so. The concern is that you're not suddenly giving people breaks. You must charge people all the same. That's according to the SEC advisory opinion. And as far as couriers go, students at couriers, for example, if an outside group wishes to send a newsletter home, the PTO, and sometimes they talk about backpacks, you can send something, I guess, time, place, and question to be voted upon. Let's assume there's a regular newsletter by the PTO that sometimes goes home. You could have that. Now, we're going to talk about other neutral materials later in the presentation about something, and that there's a process. If the board's preparing something and sending it home, that's another issue. But in terms of you're using the students as couriers, quite clearly, they're viewed to be a fund because you have access to them, and only thing you can send home again is non-advocacy, time, place, and question voted upon. Anything else, good luck, God bless you, because you'll be violating the law.
Peter, I see your hand up. Did you have something?
Just a couple of quick questions, if I may.
Certainly.
There are people that, for example, Mark, who's just speaking, is a volunteer. He's helping the city as an advocate, and they move this forward. The council then votes on it. the elected officials who make the decision to place it on the ballot themselves, I've always viewed that in one sense, we're kind of held to a higher standard because it was our vote that put it on the ballot. So is the best course of action that we not comment, even from a comparison standpoint, which is just educational information. What if you do this and you don't do that? I mean, that's where you run the danger or the risk of violating this statute. And what is the outcome if it's deemed that you have violated? It doesn't negate the referendum, right?
Yeah, generally speaking, I think there was one court case someone tried. I've been involved in these referendum challenges. I think one of them, they tried to assume the violation of the SEC law somehow would invalidate it. I don't believe, Glenn, you can tell me if I'm wrong, we would argue whether the SEC would have the power to invalidate a referendum, because the Nicholas case passed by a 2/3 vote, and they didn't, and at that point, the SEC didn't believe they had the power to overturn it. Now, could an expansive view of it have a different view? I don't think they could overturn it.
And I agree with that, Mark, because I haven't seen where they've overturned it.
Yeah.
Referendum. I mean, I've seen them penalize, and if you want to say the people that have violated the provision,
Yeah.
but I think that's what they're limited to.
We're going to discuss later on, they can issue fines, and we try to avoid, and one thing, I don't want to take away any thunder, you'll see the key thing on that fine about who pays that fine personally versus someone else paying. It comes out of your pocket. Let me put it that way. So you'll hear it. They can issue fines. They can't declare null and void in a referendum, though. So, in my mind, going back to and as far as that's another question too about what you can say. We're going to discuss that later on. You know, elected officials, you don't give away your First Amendment rights to speak, and I understand you got to be careful. And it's free speech as long as it's free. You know, the context of where it's being stated, as long as you're not using money to propagate that. So.
The issue of an elected official making a statement, though, the risk is enhanced if you're acting in your official capacity, for example, during a meeting, and it inadvertently comes out, and then, I mean, is that where the risk is higher?
Let me talk.
When you say a meeting, do you mean an official meeting? You know, kind of like say a meeting of, you know, like whether it's within the town or
Yeah. A Board of Ed meeting, a council meeting, you know, someone just hypothetically starts talking, not intending to actually comment on the issue, but it gets rolled in, again, inadvertent. But I would think that's the risk is greater there for review if you're actually in a meeting. Where you're,
I think it's a concern, but I think where the SEC has come on this, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, the provisions against advocacy weren't intended to stymie the political process.
okay.
So, you know, I don't believe that the intent of it is that, you know, once it's on a referendum, let's just say that the city council can't talk about it ever again, because they could be construed as promoting it or something like that. I mean, they can still carry out their duties.
Yeah, here's what happened. About 15 years ago, there was a famous case. I think it was in, I don't want to mention any towns. It was in the northeast corner. It was 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. It was 7 o'clock. And there was a live stream meeting of the Board of Education. And there was a vote going on until 8 o'clock. And one of the board members said, hey, if anyone's watching, please go to the polls and vote yes. And they found that to be in violation. So for years afterwards, we kind of had this unofficial, we called it a quiet period. You shouldn't talk about it. But then the SEC kind of said, well, wait a second. You know, that was really egregious. But if during the course of a board meeting, people are talking about this, that's part, again, as Glenn said very aptly, part of the political process. We're not going to stymie that. It's just something really gratuitous. And that's the line. I think, you know, if you're just having a meeting, at a meeting, for example, public comments, say there's a public comment section of a town meeting or a Board of Education meeting, and there's no restriction on it. Anything can be discussed. You couldn't then suddenly say, well, your person, Johnny Smith, saying vote yes for the budget, you can't, or vote yes, you couldn't, I don't think, shut them down, because I would view that as being, that's not promoting it, just it's part of the process. We have a public comment section. We don't restrict the subject matter. And I think if it comes up in a discussion in a meeting as part of a normal debate, that is something that's fine. I think it's just if it's really gratuitous, and that's the line where that was those facts in that case where there's someone saying, hey, vote yes. That's not a political discussion. That's an attempt to try to, get votes. And that was the line that was crossed. I understand there's a concern because you always, the safest way to not cross a line is to stay like, 80 yards behind the line. I
Yep.
understand there's some value to that, but you can have you can still speak during a meeting. That's what my view of the SEC recent cases would be. So, just a couple things on PTOs. I'm going to say this. We don't generally represent the PTO or PTA. I've been involved in some support level because we always say the PTO is a separate organization. It's not a school organization. On its own, spending their own money, assuming they're not using school equipment or not using students as couriers on their own, if they're doing their own thing, they can do their own thing. I just offer one caveat here. I throw on a different hat. They have to consider whether at what point they might be endangering their tax exempt status. But assuming they don't, it's not a large amount of their exempt expenditures. I think 20% is usual rule. They can continue, they can raise money. They can, and also people can form PACs. That's a separate issue. You want to form a PAC to advocate for a referendum, go ahead. But that's, again, as long as the school, the board, the town, the city, whatever is not involved, that's okay. So what happens when things go wrong, Glenn?
This was, as Mark said, this is the little touch of fear to put in. Liability and penalties. SEC under the statute is allowed, if they have a finding that the statute's been violated, that they can impose a civil penalty on any person. And I want to emphasize person who authorizes an expenditure of state or municipal funds in violation of the statute. The penalty itself will not exceed either the greater of either twice the amount of the expenditure or $1,000. So they're looking to the person. It's not a town violation. It's not a group violation. I mean, it doesn't mean they can't go after more than one person. But if they do levy a penalty on you in such, the statute also provides that, and it's that bottom piece there that's not highlighted in red. No state or municipal officer or employee shall be indemnified or reimbursed by the state or a municipality for this type of penalty. So even if you're acting, you feel that the prodding of the city or of the board or such, and they say, go ahead, don't worry about it. We got your back. We got you covered. They can't. So if the action is taken that violates it, it's your penalty. And we've added after this some tips to avoid fines and penalties. I think the first one is kind of tongue in cheek. Obviously, comply with the law. The second one, when in doubt, call your attorney. And as we point out, that in Sweetman, the court was very keen to point out that they did not run the materials by their attorney. And what they did was they clearly noted it as it was a lack of a good faith effort to comply with the statute. So, use your city attorney, your bond counsel, or use, just it's there. The other is, like we were saying at the beginning, is the SEC. Unlike the IRS, who I think, we all kind of we all think anyway that you start with the guilty until you're innocent sort of thing. The SEC really does provide a lot of guidance and help, and they are they're there. We put the phone numbers down. They will work with you, or at least provide some advice. They may tell you to go run it by your attorney first and then come back, but they will be there. Part of that good faith effort to comply, it's hard to argue that you have no help available or nowhere to turn, particularly with the way the SEC has been.
Yeah, you would hope that if you called the SEC and they told you something was okay and something went wrong, you'd probably be in a good position not to get fined. If they, you know, you would hope.
I mean, my experience with them is they usually do tell you to check with your attorney first, and they do the IRS disclaimer. Usually, they use that one where you know, we're not giving legal advice or tax advice or whatever, you know. So
Yeah, I mean, I've had where I've been asked. I figured this was a close call. I'd call them, and I thought I'd be getting some breakthrough. This is the SEC. They're the experts. I'm just a humble attorney sitting in my office, and they're like. They didn't even want to deal with the nuance. They're like, well, call, you know, if you call the regular board attorney. I said, well, I am the board attorney, and I've been before you folks, and I know a little bit about this. Obviously, I've done presentations, and they're like, well, you'll figure it out. I'm thinking, well, that's great.
Well, now we come around to, again, what can you do? And I think as Mark started touching on this earlier, free speech. And I think, again, a little bit of tongue in cheek in the brackets, as long as it, in fact, is free. It's not a total shutdown. People can be in their capacity as individuals. You know, whether they're a part of the PTO, whether they're administrators or part of the legislative body or such, you know, your right to express yourself isn't necessarily inhibited for obvious, you know, constitutional reasons and such. But again, it comes down to the use of public funds, and is, you know, at the very, you know, most should be focused on is that the public funds are not there for advocacy, but you still can be a citizen, if you will. The SEC has also provided guidance indicating that it's generally acceptable for board members to discuss the budget at a board meeting, even after the referendum is pending. Again, that kind of folds back to where we were saying about not stymieing the process, but like Mark had cautioned, really should not go over any lines or be egregious in, you know, kind of, I don't know if you want to say going over the top and trying to make it an advocacy matter. We've put down on the next slide a couple other items that you can do. We talk about how the provision doesn't apply to written, printed, or typed summaries of an official's view on a proposal or question, which is prepared for any news medium or which is not distributed with public funds to a member of the public except upon the request of such member. You know, that press releases and such, or at least, you know, a summary like that, that's part of you know, what the SEC has addressed. An official can express his or her views on a pending referendum at a bona fide news conference. You know, that also, again, if people in the public say, hey, you're the mayor, what, you know, where do you really stand on it? And they engage you. You know, you don't have to turn away and walk away. You know, it doesn't mean hand them something that is, you know, promotes advocacy of any kind or is, you know, cost the municipality anything, but it doesn't mean that you have to, again, you know, run and hide if the subject comes up when a referendum's in place.
I see a raised hand from Mark Kulos.
Yes, so on any letter to the editor or whatnot, I can use my office, Mark Kulos, Board of Ed member. That's all right. So I can mention my political office.
I think, well, I think it starts getting messy when it starts confusing in what capacity that you're, you know, sending, because you're writing a letter to the editor. It's going to express that assumedly you're for the project. Let's just say, and you know, there's nothing better than this. It's gonna be perfect for the city. You know, you could get into a lot. questions. One, when did you pen it? When did you write it? Did you write it on town time or, city time? Then that opens up the door for questions in that regard. As a citizen, as just your name and city of Norwich, I don't think there's an issue, especially because, again, if you haven't used any funds or anything, I don't think I've come across where indicating who you are. I haven't had a formal matter where it's been a problem. I was going to say, Mark, have you come across anything where,
No,
say,
no,
like on a project like
you could say again, assuming you're using your own computer, your own paper, you send something to you still send letters to the editor by paper to email them, whatever you do. If you do something on your own without any use of public funds, using your own computer to to the news saying, I support this project, please vote yes, John Smith, chairman of the Happy Town Board of Education, they're probably going to be okay. That's again, you exercising, again, it's free speech and it's free. Now, if you start using something, again, I think that's a pretty clear line to keep. I think because we want to, again, it's always good to have clear lines.
Because I assume that in a press conference or in something over the radio, the host or whatever would introduce you as the person and also state your office.
Yeah, that's who you are. And I think, frankly, they want to because they want to make sure it's not just some random person saying it, because they have an obligation to news media to make sure they're not being surreptitiously stacking things, and they're obviously interviewing it. So I have no problem if you're interviewed on the news, interviewed on the radio, and they say this is the chairperson of this, or this is the first or second selectman, or this or that. That's fine. That's who you are. It's you're being interviewed by the news media. You're not spending any money. Now, as far as a press conference, I would say, you see here, if there's a bona fide press conference and not something staged, you could use public money to prepare a press release at the conference. Okay, again, limited to that. And if someone sends a constituent request for information, someone writes to the superintendent of schools and says, I want your position on this, or a person asks for information, so that person says, I want to know how much is this or that. If you're responding to it, again, assuming it's not something that's played together, where we say, hey, send me an email so I can respond to it, and then you can send it out to 28,000 more people. If you just respond to that, that is okay.
So a press release on, say, Board of Ed letterhead would be fine.
Yeah.
Associated with a press conference.
With a press conference, it says expressly in the guidance that you can do so. So, and it says also in the statute now that, a printed summary it's now actually added in the statute, and it was in the guidance.
All right, thank you.
Now, we came here to talk about is explanatory text. And I just out of curiosity, has it been done yet here? And is it for this project?
Yes, it's all done.
Yeah, okay, because this is the process. First of all, you know what it is. First off, there has to be a vote by the legislative body to prepare it, to authorize it. And then there's a process in terms of, authorizing it by the legislative body. And the interesting thing is it's prepared by the town clerk, and it's in the statute, subject to the approval of the town attorney. And the same thing exists for the regional school district. It actually says in the law that it's subject to the approval. I'm not sure if it was done benefit attorneys anywhere, but it does actually require it. You just send it to your attorney. You just can't say, well, we don't want to send it. You have to do so. There's a few regional districts I work with every April. I'm reviewing these for their budget votes, and to make sure they comply with the law. And it must clearly must be clear what is the intent and purpose of the you can specify that it's to build a new whatever $1 million high school. You can say that. Now, here's the thing: the clerk's supposed to print enough for public distribution, whatever that might mean, and also provide for the printing of certain posters to be determined by the clerk. There must be at least 3 posters at each polling place, and it's the size to be determined by the clerk. Usually, they're pretty significant. I don't think there's anything in the law saying it must be 8 feet by 10 feet, but it's the poster size, whatever that might be. And any posters in excess of that number can be displayed by the clerk at the discretion in locations frequented by the public. So if for some reason you have extra posters, you can put it somewhere else, somewhere. And explanatory text, if I've seen this, we all seen this now with COVID, when people went by absentee ballot. Each absentee ballot applicant gets a copy of the explanatory text. That is permitted. Now, some keys here. Obvious thing, such text shall not advocate either the approval or disapproval of the proposal at question. For example, and I use this example, the project costs $1.5 million. That's fine. Or versus, oh, we tried to contain cost, or this will be great for our kids, or this will help our education of our kids. I think the Sweetman stuff we indicated are some cautionary notes or things here are not explanatory text. For example, saying, I think it's permissible in the context of a budget, saying this budget will lead to a 5% increase without saying this is not steep. Again, my view is, I almost had as a subtitle of this whole thing, adjectives, avoid adjectives. Because once you start describing something as opposed to what it is, at that point you bear a significant risk. So again, the explanatory text, and I think we've gone through this, what it can say about the project. And again, just the facts, not going into, this was the best alternative, or this will lead to improved air quote, all the things that it will do that are good. It just will, you have to list what it's going to do factually. Glenn?
Yep. We were talking earlier, or we touched upon other materials, other neutral printed materials. A lot of times towns will want to have something in addition to what we just consider plain explanatory text. There's provision within the statute again that such materials has to be approved by the legislative body and the municipal attorney. Again, the emphasis is on that they shall not advocate, as well as they are prepared by the person who is authorized by the legislative body to prepare it. So normally in that resolutions that when the project is passed, you normally see the town clerk being authorized to prepare explanatory text for the referendum. With regards to other neutral printed materials, they certainly, again, would need the authorization of the legislative body, passing on it and authorizing the person to produce it. And neutral materials likewise could be distributed or even posted on the town website. Again, the emphasis is on no advocate.
Yeah, I just want to say that oftentimes I've had clients vote at the same meeting or in the same motion to authorize explanatory text and other neutral materials. They've already taken care of it in one full swoop.
We do that with towns as well, because it's just kind of a, put it all up front. And sometimes, it's easier that than going back on things. And I believe in our case here, I think we've looked at that. Sometimes for going into a referendum, a lot of times people like to put together like pro and con summaries. What's the good? What's the bad? The statute again provides that by ordinance, the proposals in the referendum which are prepared, the ordinance can provide for a committee, and these committees are made up of people that represent various viewpoints. So that, hopefully you're kind of representing, the pros as much as you're representing the cons, I would imagine. And they in turn prepare these summaries. They should be, I think, as we put in there, be representative of various viewpoints. And the committee must also provide for an opportunity for public comment. So it's not done in a total vacuum. The summaries then have to be approved by vote of the legislative body. And posted and distributed in the same manner as explanatory text. So, we were talking about having those out there in the public square, the distribution, particularly with absentee ballots. That's all those rules apply again. They also have that, the other requirement is that if you do have a pro and con summary, it also has to contain language that clearly states that it's not an endorsement or represent the official position of the town. I think that's where we were talking about the Pfizer situation, if you will. So you got to be careful with those. You can do that, but you got to be careful with how you proceed with them. Mark, I was going to ask you if you've come across where on a pro-con summary, where you've had anybody where they've been, say, like all pro and maybe one kind of token con, if you will, trying to get past, trying to use that as a vehicle.
I would be very leery of that. I mean, I'm not sure there's a requirement in the law that there must be an equivalent word count, but concise means concise. And I think if one's lengthier than the other, it would kind of, much too lengthier, it would kind of obviate any argument that it is a concise argument if you have three versus one. So I'm not sure it's built into the law, but I think it's implied that there be at least something proportional. I mean, we could argue, since usually we're involved in trying to, in projects that we're trying to get, passed, that all the arguments are on our side, and truth, justice, and the American way is, and the other side is wrong, but still you have to give an equal opportunity to do so. Now, the question would be, if the people that are preparing the cons, if the members of the community are just not as persuasive, you can't even it out too much, but I think there has to be at least somewhat equivalent. It would stick out otherwise.
I've always had the kind of the thought that I guess reasonable balance, if you will. I don't think there's a magic number that you kind of have 5 pros to 1 con, or 5 to 3, or 4 or something of that nature. But I think we're back to that that idea of taking it as a whole, and as long as it's a reasonable balance, I think is where we've headed before.
Yeah, and here's the key: this has to be done by ordinance. So yeah, that's the key there, whether you can do it or not.
Turning to community notification systems, we had touched on that with Nicholas. Nicholas was before the statute was changed, but we've laid out little various points from it. Again, what a community notification system is. It's not just the robocall. This is the provision that brings in all those emails, texts, and then that nice catch-all of other electronic or automated means. So I think we're talking in those social media items that are, say, if the town has a Twitter page or has a Facebook page or such, that's going to be swept up in this. The chief elected official, again, what I was saying before, can authorize the use of the community notification system, but again, it's subject to the limitations that I outlined earlier. Time and location of the referendum, statement of the question as it appears on the ballot, and if applicable, any approved explanatory text or neutral materials. That is, again, it's tough on a robocall or such, but there, again, when you're taking into effect emails and electronic means, that certainly can be in there. Again, the emphasis, it doesn't have approval or disapproval. And, no person may use, again, we're back to the funds. You can't use those. And, again, that was one of the prongs that the SEEC had off of that. On the bottom point, just, other than the notice to authorize, no person may use the funds to send unsolicited communication to residents regarding referendum by electronic mail, text, telephone, etc., for the purpose of reminding or encouraging residents to vote, provided such prohibition shall not apply to a regularly published newspaper or similar publication. websites is another area that has, as towns have put things up, I think I was touching upon it a little bit earlier. The website, again, comes under that community notification system language. And we're back to that point of that's something that is an expenditure of funds, putting it out there. So again, be careful with what you have up there, what you reference people to. The thing is that, you can't have on there and point to an advocacy piece that's may not even be on that website, but if you're pointing them to using that website to send somebody to a pro or a con position, that's going to be problematic. However, it also provides that the maintenance of a third-party comment posted on social media or a website maintained by the state, municipality, or regional school district permitting such comments does not constitute an illegal expenditure of state or municipal funds. So the person that comments on you or says yay or nay or such, that's not your issue. That's outside of your control.
It's interesting is I still go back to the whole issue about the meetings and the documents that may have been put up there prior to the referendum being pending. And, I think it's a better practice to remove things that might be too inflammatory. Put it that way. I mean, it's one thing to keep the minutes up to a meeting. And if you had I would argue if you have, sometimes people will post the board packages for the meeting. And sometimes those board packages, I've seen them, submitted to board members, they post them on the website, will have materials given to the board members. And it might have materials in there. I'd argue that would not be something you remove. But if you have like a slideshow, what you saw in the Guilford, the Nicholas case, that's something you probably might want to put somewhere else, remove.
Yeah, we've, as far as taking down what's up there, things that are part of the official record, in the minutes of meetings and have been incorporated into the minutes of it. We've never told anybody to take things down off of there, because again, that works in play with that stymieing the political process or not. And that, the record is the record. You just can't expunge things till a referendum's over. Our problems that we had found is when, say, like, and I'll use, again, a public works department, may want a new salt shed or something like that. And so they've been going, really promoting it and such, and they've got a whole bunch of things on their website that's, how great it's going to be and how it's going to make the town much better and such. And, it turns out that once, that's really not official agenda. It's just, they're just posting up all these things on why they need it and why you should vote for it. They're a department, they're part of the municipality. It's, there's the expenditure of the funds there, the fact that essentially it's the town website. Those are the problems. I think, again, if it's part of the official process, again, city council minutes, things like that, I don't think that's what this was meant to get after.
This is the part where we say, hey, first of all, these are contact information. Are there any other questions that you want us to answer? I see someone raising. Are there any? You're all spellbound, right?
Yeah, in my case, yes, of course, but I would wonder if it was possible if we could just get a copy of your PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, certainly. We'll have it distributed. I think it's been put out there.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I see Mark Poulos.
Poulos.
Yes, is it possible for the public to come and visit our schools? I don't know if that's advocating or if it crosses the line.
Do you have a policy in general about the ability of the public to visit the school? Visitors?
I'll defer to the superintendent on that, but generally they have to be, well, it wouldn't be when the kids are in session, so it would have to be after school or on a weekend.
Yeah,
This is Kristen Stringfellow, I'm the superintendent. I think what Mark is alluding to is not a request from a parent, hey, I'd like to go see Stanton Elementary School, but the building committee and or Board of Ed making a sort of a small campaign to say, anyone in the public who's voting on the referendum, if you'd like to come see the schools, we're going to hold tours Saturday, such and such. If I'm formulating that correctly, Mark.
That's correct. Just to see the status of the facilities. Not advocating one way or the other.
It gets concerned, and Glenn, tell me if I'm wrong. I may be wrong on this, that once you do something that's different that you normally do for facility access. You know,
Could you speak just a little louder?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Once you get to something beyond facility access, your general facility access, that's where there could be some problems I see here. If you're holding specific, these would be Board of Education functions, or how would this be done?
It would either be the building committee or the Board of Education, myself and the maintenance director leading tours. And so that's been contemplated, but based upon this presentation, my worry is how it will be construed, because we're certainly not taking them around to see our comfortable and luxurious surroundings.
Yeah, I mean, look, the concern I have is, and I could look at this specifically, would be the extent that these are tours that are off school time, and there has to be, if there's any expenditure of any utility to keep the school building open for this to take place.
Certainly, we
Custodian
need
help,
lights and heat and
custodial help.
custodians.
Yeah, that might be a problem. Glenn, what do you think?
I think I get to the, I think right up there against, I think it could be problematic in that, you know, by the mere fact, I think what you were touching on, they're on the heats on, you know, you're essentially, the question would come up as, are you using the school in that tour to promote something? I get a little concerned that it's not something that's usually available. And it seems to be something that would be put, you know, the question would come up, what else would you be bringing people to see then? You know, I think, like you said, it's not your luxurious stuff. It's, I want you to see for yourself why we need the vote to go yes. I think it could be problematic.
Yeah,
And
I think the thing too is
I'm sorry.
with people and you're, you know, all I was going to say is, you know, people, you know, you're going to talk. It won't be a lead in silence session, I would imagine as well.
Oh, I agree. And so what will happen is, I think there exists the concern of how the conversation will go during these tours. And, you know, what's said and what's construed as leaning into expressions of a vote in one way or the other. So yes, we've never done, this is my 4th year. We've not said, hey, come on in and, you know, see our really cramped spaces and leaking roofs before. So there is a reason you bring the community in so that they could make an educated decision. But I would agree with your caution on that.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I could have sworn there was an SEC case on this. Maybe I'm misremembering. I'll take a look at this tonight. If I have anything, I'll share it with you folks specifically on this. There may be a case, I thought, when I think about it. But say it could be concerning, let's put it that way. Any other questions? I would leave you with maybe the most important slide was the slide that had phone numbers of the SEC and the calling attorneys and stuff. If you seek some guidance and act in good faith based upon it, you should be in a reasonably good stead, at least in avoiding a fine. You may still be found to be in violation, sometimes they make you sign these agreements where you go forth and sin no more type agreements to
Yep.
settle these, but you probably won't hit, and it could be politically an issue, but if you rely upon advice of counsel or rely upon advice of the SEC or act in good faith based upon it, you should not have to pay money out of your pocket. Any other comments, questions, thoughts?
Nope.
Are people hungry?
Yep.
Got a sandwich.
Good for you.
I have to go cook dinner now.
Oh, well, I
Thank you
do.
for this, thank you very much for this informative presentation. It certainly does bring a light to a lot of information that we need to discuss as a board of it, as at the Board of Education, but it also brings to light some of the ramifications if we don't follow the rules.
Even if you win, they'll start to question the legitimacy of political issues. Yeah, it's always nice to talk, to toe the line wherever possible. Understanding you're not completely, without any ability to express yourself. That's the thing. The lawyers often tell you what you can't do. It is nice being able to tell you what you can do. So.
Yep. Well put.
So who's the host of this fine thing?
I guess I am, since I started it off, and I do want to thank everybody for participating in the questions. A little lobbying here. The city was able to coax out of the citizens a $150 million pension bond issue last year. Probably the largest bond issue we had up until this one, and we stayed within the in the parameters basically. But we did a lot of work with the newspapers and editorials, and speaking to the editorial writers, and got them on our side, and I think that was really helpful. So I think what I would say, based on my experience, is that when in doubt, call up the lawyer, but you're not as limited as you think you are in some areas, as long as you're not really spending money on it directly from city or town funds. You can express your own opinion in this, and it's not that somebody's going to cut your nose off for doing that. So I want to thank everybody for coming. This was a great idea. It wasn't mine, and I think it's very helpful. And it's a big bond issue, so it's going to take a lot of information to get to the people to make a good decision on this. So thank you very much, and everybody have a good evening.